Kind of referencing what we're just talking about, is there anything in your life that if it would just go away, you would be good to go? Anybody have some neighbors that if they would just go away, your life would be awesome? Seriously, you can be straight with us here at Epic because your neighbor probably isn't in the room. Anybody have a roommate that if they would just kind of go, that you're showing your roommate awesome, cheaper places they could go live? Anybody doing that? Anyone have a boss that if the boss would just leave, everything else would be amazing? Some of us have things in reality that we just want them to end. Some of you have some addictions and you just want, like if God would just end that, you would never ask him for another thing. And we laugh about that, but we make deals with God. Like, God, if you'll just do this thing, if you'll just bring our daughter home from India a little sooner, if you will get our kids into the good college, if you'll help us out financially, we won't ask for another thing. We just need your power to show up. But what happens is when we only get the power of God in our lives and we don't want anything else, we miss out on the intimacy that he is offering us today. I want to show you a story in just a moment with this woman, and she had been in a terrible pain for over a decade. And this pain wasn't just a physical thing for her. You'll see what else it meant for her life in just a little bit. But here's what she wanted. She just wanted to find someone to make her pain go away. And some of you are at that point. Some of you, your whole reason for trying church or seeking Jesus, you just want to find someone who will put an end to the thing that you're tired of living with. And that's a great reason to start seeking Jesus. But if you stop there, you and I are going to miss out. If we stop there, we're going to miss out on so much that he wants to bring into our midst. And so if you have a Bible with you, we're in Mark chapter 5 again. If you need a Bible, lift a hand. We'll distribute one to you. Yours to keep. You can have it for the morning or forever. Mark chapter 5, and we'll start in verse 25 in just a little bit. This goes with the story we told last week. And so if you were here, great. If not, let me catch you up. Last week we saw Jesus in the midst of a crowd, and there was a guy named Jairus whose 12-year-old daughter was at the point of death. And he was so desperate for some help for her that he went and implored Jesus earnestly, saying this, "My daughter is at the point of death, but I still know that you can come and make her well." And so Jesus engages Jairus, even though he's in the midst of a huge crowd, and Jairus is excited that he's going to come and do something about his daughter's situation. But do you remember this story? On the way to heal Jairus' daughter, Jesus got delayed. Do you remember this? Now, if you're Jairus, I'm thinking, anyone else feel like the world revolves around them or should, especially in a moment of crisis? If you're Jairus, you're thinking, Jesus, my daughter is dying. How in the world are you going to let anything else interrupt you? And what he allows to interrupt him is our text for today. And so stand with me. Let's look at Mark chapter 5, 25 through 34. And here's how important this text is for us today. Here's how important this text is. This encounter was so important to Jesus that he allowed Jairus' daughter to die. And of course, he did have some superpowers working for him, right? He allowed Jairus' daughter to die. He knew he was going to raise her from the dead, so that's a given. That's an amazing thing. He knew that going into it. But it was so important, this situation, there's a woman who had a medical issue for over 10 years, and Jesus stops and allows himself to be interrupted on his way to resurrect Jairus' daughter. And it was so important. Someone once said, and what I was reading this week is with her medical issue that was a chronic but not an acute issue, that in today's emergency rooms, Jesus would have been charged with malpractice because he allowed a little girl to die while taking care of a woman who wasn't dying. Pretty interesting to think about. 12 years she had been sick, and you'll see that in the text. 25. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment. For she said, "If I touch even his garments, I will be made well." And immediately, Mark uses that adverb all the time, which is cool. It showed up last week in verse 42. And immediately, the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. And the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter." Now, apparently this is the only time Jesus uses this title in the Gospels. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Have a seat and let's see what's so amazing about this encounter. Again, for starters, you have Jairus, who's got a 12-year-old daughter who's dying. She's at the point of death. And there's a crowd pressing around. And you have this woman who comes up, touches his garments, and he stops. He stops dead in his tracks. He's on his way to some amazing mission, right? And he stops dead in his tracks and gives not just healing attention to this woman, he goes beyond that and he gets into her heart issues. And so right off the bat, you see this is a woman who's had a discharge of blood issue for 12 years. She spent all the money that she had. She's seen every doctor she could possibly see, and instead of getting any better, she grew worse. And just like we would do, we want to find someone that will give us a solution. That's her approach. She spent all of her money to take care of this one thing because she lived with this belief. And I get it. You get it too. She lived with this thing that many of us have in the room today in our lives. There's just this one thing, Ben. There's just this one relationship. There's just this one medical issue. There's just this one addiction I have. And if this one thing would go away, I would have an amazing life. Anybody ever think that? Just one. Like, Ben, I don't need the 3 wishes from the genie. I just need one. It's a big wish. And some of us today, we're living with this belief that if I could just get this one thing to be removed from my life, all would be well. And God, I don't need you to do a whole bunch for me. I just need you to do this what? This one thing. This woman's approach has been the same, and you and I get it, right? For 12 years. Most of us don't like having a hangnail for 12 seconds, right? She's had this major issue for 12 years, and she just wants it to end. And to get it to end, she's tried everything. She's gone to one doctor, and you can imagine, if you know anything about how things were in the first century, there was a remedy that he would prescribe, and who knows exactly what it was, and it didn't work. It actually made her feel worse, and then she went to the next doctor, and a remedy was prescribed, and some medicine of some sort happened, and that didn't work, and so she just kept going and going and going. But now she has no money, and worse than that, not only is she broke financially, she's not any better. She's actually worse than when she started physically. So we know a couple of things about her condition just right on the surface. She has no money, so we know about her financial situation. Her body got no better, so we know something about her physical condition. And that's enough, right? She's got enough pain just with those two sources. Anybody ever been broke? Anybody? Everybody? Anybody broke right now? Yep, me too. So she's broke, and she's physically broke as well. Her body isn't working like it's supposed to, and it's been that way for over 10 years. But if you only see the surface conditions in her life, you will miss the heart and mind conditions that have been true in her life. So she's in pain, she has no money, but it goes much deeper than that. Because her issue is a blood issue, she is an outcast in her society. But you might think, okay, that's tough, but Ben, thankfully, she's probably a part of some religious community, and they probably took her in and cared for her. Well, not only has she been a social outcast for the last dozen years, she has been religiously considered ceremonially unclean, which means this: she hasn't been to the temple for worship in 12 years. And she likely hasn't had another human being touch her for 12 years. Some of you live around so many people here in San Francisco, you're like, Ben, I would love to be alone for 12 years. That would be awesome. But it's a different thing. She's emotionally, her emotional situation, her mental state, her heart condition is worse than her financial condition and her physical condition. And some of us think right now only on the surface of our lives, and we think if that neighbor would go away, if the job would go away, or something better would come, or if this pain would go away, that's all I need. And Jesus is trying to tell her and tell us this morning, no, you've got bigger needs than that. You've got bigger needs that are below the surface. And he's trying to get below the surface with this woman. Remember, she had been unclean, but she still has a little bit of hope. Anyone consider yourself an eternal optimist? Anybody? Or just an optimist at all? This is a participation thing, okay? Too many people at 9:30 were like, they didn't raise their hand. You're either a pessimist or an optimist, all right? And I know what some of you smart people are thinking. No, Ben, I'm a realist. No, listen. You're either, like, you lean one way or the other. Optimism, anybody? All right, pessimism? My last pastor, he was a pessimist. And I'm like, what? Man, this guy's a spiritual leader of a big church. How can he be a pessimist? But he said, Ben, it's great. You either get what you expect or something way better. I was like, all right, man. I'm not going to live by that, but it sounds good for you. But I'm an optimist. I'm like, no, there's got to be a way. I can figure this out. I can find a thing on the internet. I can, whatever. And she has been trying to figure out there's got to be a way. And she still has some hope. Man, again, after 12 months, most of us bow out of the processes that are difficult, but she's hanging in there. She's still looking for an answer. She's still looking for a remedy. And verses 27 and 28 say that she got a report, or reports about this Jesus guy who's now busted onto the scene, and he is taking care of people's issues. Maybe he'll take care of my issue. She doesn't know about the whole Messiah part, at least not how he might think about her if he was the Messiah, but she knows that he's got some supernatural power. And so if I could just get close to him and just touch his garments, that's all I need to do, touch his garments, then I can be different. This one thing that I have, it can go away if I touch his garments. And if it goes away, I'm good for the rest of my life. I don't need anything else. Look at verse 27 when she approaches him. Two phrases you don't need to miss. It says that she came up behind him, so behind him and in the crowd. Behind him is a phrase, and in the crowd is a phrase. And these are, Mark's not including this just so he can get his word count in like I did when I was in a high school English class. Anybody? Like, all right, I've got to have a longer sentence. It's pointed. There's a point he's making here. She came behind Jesus, and she made sure to touch him while the crowd was pressing in all around. Why did she do this? Here's why. She desired his power, but she never wanted him to know who she was. She wanted his power. I need to touch him. I want power. I want something from him. But she did it while in the crowd so that she could remain anonymous, and she did it from behind, so there's no chance would he be able to turn around and see who she was. And him. So there's a crowd, and she's doing it from behind. She doesn't want to be known. She knows what her condition is. She knows the environment in which she lives. She knows that if Jesus knew she was the one touching him and what her issue was, that she would be making him unclean in a moment's notice. So what Tim Keller says is that she wanted to do a touch and run. She wanted the power and to get out of Dodge. Some of you, you're doing the church thing, you're even doing the prayer thing. You want Jesus to take care of one thing. And if he'll do that, that's all you need. And you'll let him take a vacation from your life for the rest of your life, you think, right now. And what he's saying to this woman in a moment and what he's trying to say to you is like, that's not all I want. That's not all that I want. You're going to miss out if you just get the power of God in your life and you don't get the relationship as a son or daughter in your life. And so she had heard the reports about Jesus. She came up behind him, said, if I could just touch his garment, then I will be made well. So she's definitely got some faith, but she doesn't necessarily have faith in him as the Son of God. She has faith like, oh, the doctors couldn't do it. Maybe he's the new doctor. Or maybe he's got some magical or even supernatural powers. Let me get to him, just touch his garment, not let him see me, and then hopefully I'll be good to go. This one thing is done, and I can move on with my life, and I can be, maybe I can go to a different town and start a life over. Who knows what she's thinking in this moment. And then verse 29, again, Mark uses this adverb so often. It says, immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And then verse 30 says, Jesus perceived that power had left him. It's so interesting to me that Mark points out that her and Jesus each had a deep sense that something had changed in them. For Jesus, the sense was that power had left him. For this woman, the obvious sense was that power had came to her, so much so that she knew in a moment, my body is different. Immediately, Mark says, the flow of blood stopped, and I knew that I'd been healed of my disease. It's her thought. But what's crazy to me is that I would have been, and you would have been, and this woman would have been sufficient for her and us to have walked away and never had to ask anything else of Jesus. Right? She got everything. Did she get everything she wanted? Yes. Yes, she got everything that she wanted. And why she had to have this pain for 12 years and Jesus was able to end it immediately and he let it go on for 12 years in her life, if you were to ask me, Ben, why? I've got to tell you, I don't know. And you're like, but Ben, we pay you for that. I still don't know. Why did God's people, the nation of Israel, Why were they enslaved? Over 4 centuries. And then in a moment, with the 10th plague, Pharaoh let them go and God freed them in a moment. Why did he allow them to be enslaved for 400 plus years? Again, I don't know. If God can change your situation that you're struggling with right now, and it's been on you, your addiction, your financial situation, your relationship, your family, your job, whatever the case may be, if he could change it in a moment's notice, and you've had it for months, you've had it for years, some of you had it for decades, and he hasn't changed it yet, why has he not changed it? I have no idea. But I don't think you and I should understand that his for whatever reason, him not changing that thing in our lives yet takes away his heart for us in it. And so immediately it changes. And again, to think about this power, like if God's power would flow into the painful areas of your life, how could things be different than they are today? And again, like I'm not trying to just get you to be an optimist for a moment, and I'm not standing up here saying, hey, just think about this and it'll happen, but just think about it for a moment. What if God's power were to flow directly, like not to all, like, you know, like if he just singled his power in on that one thing, like all the power that he possesses, just that one thing in your life, what would change? How would things go? What would be different than it is today? And what I want to say to you is, while I can't guarantee that that will happen, I can guarantee you that he has the authority to make it happen. We saw last week that when we have this inside the house faith, there are things that Jesus does in response to our faith. And I want to say to you, no matter how many years it's been, no matter how difficult it seems, no matter how impossible the doctors are telling you it is, or the person in your life is telling you it is, don't give up hope, because God is able. He is able, and you need to lean into that, and you need to see your faith grow in that. But he's not just wanting to have that one thing go away in your life. He's wanting to start something and help you understand what he's up to. You go into verse 30, and Jesus says something odd. He says, in the midst of a crowd, who touched me? Who touched me? And the disciples are like, Jesus, that's a crazy question. What do you mean, who touched you? There are tons of people here. What do you mean, who touched you? That's the disciples' response. Think about Jairus' response. You're like, Ben, I don't see that in the text. It's not in the text. But we've all met crazy dads. Anybody ever met a crazy dad? That will do anything for his son or daughter? That's Jairus. No doubt. This is why he urgently implored Jesus. And so he's there. He knows that Jesus has engaged him. Jesus is going to do something for his daughter. He believes. He's got great faith. But what do you think he's thinking when Jesus stops, not just to heal this woman, but now Jesus wants to talk about it? Anybody have someone in their life that just talks like way too much? Right? A couple of things they do, right? They use 500 words to say what they could say in 5 words. Anybody? Some of you are wondering, like, here's the rule. Just text those people, all right? Some of you are thinking, oh, the pastor never answers my calls. I must be one of those. Just text those people, okay? Don't, like, there are people you know that if you get on the phone, mom, especially parents, some of your parents back home, like, I can't do it. Mom, I do not have 3 days to talk to you right now. I cannot do it. You can imagine Jairus is thinking, Jesus, who cares who touched you? I've got a 12-year-old girl, and she's going to die if you don't show up. But Jesus wants to talk about the feelings of this woman. Why is Jesus doing this? Why was it not enough to Jesus to give his power and let this woman go on her merry way? Why is he going to do what he's going to do? Look at what he does. He says, no, who touched me? First he says, who touched my garments? The disciples are like, what do you mean, who touched you? And then he's looking around, right? It's one of those situations when I was in school growing up, you knew that if the person who had done the thing didn't admit they had done it, the whole class was getting punished. Anybody? Right? So Jesus, he's like, who touched me? But he doesn't just leave. You can imagine the woman going, please don't call on me, please don't call on me, don't look at me, don't look at me, don't. But he doesn't leave. He starts looking around. And she knows he's not leaving till he makes his point. And she's feeling terrible at the moment. She's about to be exposed. To see this woman, she wanted to remain anonymous, but now she's been found out. She wanted to keep this a private matter, but all of a sudden it's become a very public matter. She wanted to get his power and walk away. Now she's having to stay, and she's beginning to realize this is going to be an exchange beyond mere power. See, we just want the one thing, and we want to be on our merry way too. But Jesus had something more for her, and he has something more for you. So verse 33, she comes and she, knowing what had happened to her, in fear and trembling, falls down before Jesus. And she tells Jesus the whole truth, Mark says. She lays it all out there. The whole entire truth. Now, it's obvious to me why she didn't want Jesus to know who she was. Isn't it obvious to you? You see, Jesus was a Jew, and Jesus, even though he certainly played outside the rules of religion, because he was a Jew, he had to play inside the rules as well. And what she knew, think about the irony of this, she knew that because she had a blood issue, for Jesus to touch her, or for her and Jesus to have contact with each other, in a moment, it made him unclean. So think about this. The issue of blood had kept her out of the temple for 12 years because she was unclean. The moment that she touched Jesus, her blood issue is gone, so where does she get to go inside? And guess who can't go in the temple now? Like, but Ben, I thought Jesus was there. And by the way, because just hypothesizing a little bit here, Jesus was already unclean because he touched this woman's body when she had the issue of blood. He thought, well, might as well go touch this little 12-year-old girl too. I'm already unclean. Death and blood are the two things that made someone religiously, ritually, ceremonially unclean. And in a moment, Jesus does both. Isn't it fascinating? As the power leaves him, he also becomes unclean, just ceremonially speaking, and she becomes clean. What she couldn't do, now he can't do. And she can. I don't know, that's just fascinating to me. She knows that if she gets exposed, she wanted Jesus' power, but she didn't know how he would respond. And here comes his response. She kneels down. She's in fear and trembling. She tells him the whole truth. And we are not like her, right? We are awesome with vulnerability and full exposure, right? Aren't we? I'm not talking about like beta breakers exposure. I mean like just the real us being known. No, we're terrible at it. You know what we're awesome with, though, is our public face. Right? Right? Like, seriously, you've taken 100 pictures of yourself in the last week, but only 2 were social media worthy. And you posted those bad boys and made the rest of us think that's how you wake up looking. Yeah. Awesome. We're fans. Right? We have a great public face. We have our successful public face. We have our well-accomplished. We can give smart answers, but we don't want people to know the broken places in us. We don't want people to know the places where we're a mess. And by the way, every one of us is a mess somewhere. We don't want people to know that. We don't necessarily want Jesus to know that, so we offer him the best of us. Like, hey, we've done this for you, and we've done that for you, and we just want some power from you. We don't want more than that. Like, hey, we don't have to get so close, Jesus. Just give us some power. We'll be on our way. You get out of my life until I need you desperately again, then come back, but just for the power play, not for any other reason. And he's going to this woman, I won't let you leave with that. And again, if you're Jairus, you're thinking, what do you mean? Jesus, just let her go. You gave her what she wanted. Let her be. My daughter needs what this woman just got. And he goes, no, I've got a point to make. And here's his response in verse 34. Does he condemn her? What does he say to her? Verse 34. Again, I read where this week in the commentaries where this is the only place where Jesus uses this as a title, is to someone. He says to her what? Daughter. In a moment, she goes from outcast to daughter. You would think Jesus might like promote her along the way, right? It's not be so drastic. Like, okay, she's an outcast. Now she's okay. Now she's an accomplished person in society. Now she's a third cousin, right? He's like, no, you're going from outcast to daughter in a moment. And she would have missed that if she only got what she sought. Some of you, because you're only seeking one thing to be removed or have him do one thing in your life, you're missing this idea of son or daughter in your life. And if he had let her leave, or if he had gone on with Jairus too soon, she would have had his power, but she wouldn't have known what it was like to relate to him in an intimate way. And some of you are here in your life right now, like you want the power to come in your life. If there is a God, do something about this situation. He's going, hey, there is a God. I can do something about your situation, but I want to do a little bit more than just something about your situation. I want to do something about you. From outcast to daughter. Not a bad promotion. Not a bad promotion. Daughter. And the reason he uses this, don't miss what Mark's telling us by putting this story in the midst of Jairus' story. How old was Jairus' daughter? 12. How long did this woman have an issue of blood? 12 years. What does Jesus call this woman when he first speaks to her ever? Daughter. Jesus is telling this woman who just wanted some power, hey, you know how precious Jairus' 12-year-old daughter is to him? That's how infinitely precious you are to me. You know how Jairus, while I'm talking to you, he's so nervous over there because he doesn't know whether or not I'm going to do anything for his daughter. I'm delaying myself here. Do you know that he can't bear the thought of losing her? I can't bear the thought of losing you, daughter. And then he goes on, he says, your faith has made you well. What he's telling her is, hey, it's not just that you finally found a physician that works. You have, right? But you found so much more. He's not saying, hey, your quest for physical healing is over. You found this kind of magic, supernatural doctor. No. That's not what he's saying. He said, your faith has made you well. Your faith in me and what I can do and who I am, it's building and it's growing and it has made you well. The interpretation there is that it's made you whole. Not simply physically whole, but completely whole. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. You've been healed of your disease. What would she have missed out on if Jesus would have let her leave? What would she have missed out on if Jesus would have just poured some power into her life? Would her life have been better just by getting healed? No trick question, okay. Absolutely. But would she have missed out on so much if she had just walked away with power? See, because she was completely vulnerable before Jesus at this moment, not knowing how he would respond, she got so much more than power. And I don't know what you're asking him to do, but what we typically do when we have an issue is that we fixate on that issue. So I've been doing it for a few months now myself. Every prayer becomes about that issue. In fact, if we're honest, we can be honest, right? We only pray because of that issue. And everything that we think about, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be that way to some degree, and we so fixate on that issue that we just keep telling ourselves, and we're telling God or whoever will listen, like, if this one thing was gone, I would be good. And we begin to make deals with God. Like, God, if you'll do this, then I'm doing that. If you'll do this, then I'll go away. Like, I won't ask you for anything else. Anybody ever said that one? Just do this one thing. But Jesus wouldn't let her get away with just that one thing taken care of. He asked much more from her, did he not, than she expected. Oh, but he gave her so much more than what she asked for. When we only seek God's power, we miss out on an intimate relationship as a daughter or son. When we only seek his power, and there's nothing wrong. She doesn't get chastised for seeking power from him, does she? No, Jesus just makes her go to the next stage, though. When we only seek God's power, we miss out on an intimate relationship as a daughter or a son. And some of us, we don't most need his power in our life today. Some of us most need the sonship, the daughter thing. 1 John, it says it like this. John says in 1 John 3:1 that how great is the love of the Father, that the Father has lavished upon us, that we should be called the sons and the daughters, the children of God himself. And Jesus said in John 1:12, he said that as many as received him, he gave the right to become the children of God. Being a son or daughter is better than being healed. Seriously. Being a son or daughter is better than your relationship being mended. Being a son or daughter is better than not having or getting the job of your dreams. Like it is better than all of that. But many of us in this room have never experienced the intimacy with God that he is wanting to give to us. And I just want to say, like, let's ask for his power, but let's ask more for that relational thing that he wants to give to us. I'm so thankful that this woman's story didn't end. If her story ended, here's the message for today. Jesus has all authority. He has all power. That one thing you're dealing with, go to him. He can take care of it. And that would have been a good story. But because he didn't let it stop there, may we not let it stop there. When we hear things like this and see different ways that Jesus interacts with us, I think it demands a response from us. And there are tons of responses, as many as people as are in the room. There could be that many different unique responses needed. But let me give you a few just within the Epic community that I think would help you. For starters, we're unleashing today our summer workshops that are going to get people around other people talking about very specific niches of faith and life. And so I want to encourage you to take advantage of that. We'll tell you more about that in a little bit. And another great response could be this whole idea of being a son or daughter of God. Sons and daughters of God have been identifying with him through baptism for the last couple thousand years. There are people signed up to be baptized in a couple weeks. I'd love for you to join them. But third, maybe the most pointed response is there are people in this room who are desperate for God's power to be displayed in their lives in some way. And what I would love to ask you to do, and I know it requires a little bit of vulnerability, but I'd love for you just to stand. If there's any part of your life, I'm standing already with you, okay? If there's any part of your life where you could use God's power, big or small, whatever, I would love for you to stand. I want to just pray for that over you, if you would stand with me. Just there's some part of your life where you want to see God's power on display. You know that if God's power invaded that job, if it invaded that relationship, that health issue, the conflict with a good friend, you know it could change everything. And so I'm going to go ahead and be honest. I want to pray for his power to come into your life, but I want to pray that it wouldn't stop there. That yes, his power would come, but so would this intimate relationship as a son or daughter. So God, I pray that your power would flow into the lives represented who are standing. God, I pray whatever it is, God, if it's a job thing, would your power flow into it? God, if it is a health thing, would your power flow into it? God, if it is a financial thing, send your power. If it is a lack of clarity, God, we just don't know what to do right now. We need your power and wisdom. I pray that it would flow into our lives. God, for people who are hurting and no one in this room or any other room knows about it, I pray that your power would flow into their life. But God, we ask for more than your power. God, I confess as a pastor of this church that I have been fixated on an issue. I've been asking for your power, and I've been missing out on the son-father part. God, give us more than just your power. Thank you for not letting her leave before she understood the full effect of what you were about. May we understand fully what you're about. In Jesus' name, amen. We're going to enter into a time of response through worship and song. The band's going to lead us in a couple of songs. We also have communion experience ready during this time. And so we're not in a rush. This is for those of us who've placed our faith in Jesus. It's gluten-free bread for those of you that need to know that. But here's what I want you to think about. We've been talking all morning about how there's something more important than the power of Jesus, and that is this intimate relationship with him. And the cross is where this gets climaxed the most, right? Think about the cross. It was said in the scriptures that Jesus could have used his power to have called legions of angels to rescue him. In fact, they were mocking him, saying, hey, if you're so amazing, why don't you save yourself? And if he had used his power to save himself, he would not have saved me or you. And he was willing to set aside power so that he could have sons and daughters. Don't make that in vain as we remember that this morning. And when you're ready to worship him through just receiving the thing he said, hey, do this in remembrance of me. The bread is my body. The cup represents my blood poured out for you. I lost power so that I could have sons and daughters. May we never take that in vain. And let's remember this fondly today. We don't just want his power. We need a father. We need to know we're sons. We need to live as daughters. Let's respond.